Hello there, it's Brodie McLeod here again with another one of my Wastecast videos. I don't know how many people watch these, I don't get many views really, and I guess the people that do mostly just seem to be trolls, people who kind of want to question things which are sort of inappropriate, or ask me things about things that would probably flag up with the multidisciplinary team at the hospital when discussing my consent to use my mobile phone, about what medication I'm on, or my release dates, or what my diagnosis is, things which are kind of, might be considered to be a bit non-capacitous, and things that I can't really answer. Oversharing when you're in a psychiatric ward, talking about your mental health, might be something that somebody does while they're in hospital, totally lawfully and legally and within the provisions of policies as vague as the Signet policy is on mobile phones, but regret at a later date. So I don't kind of implicitly share explicit details about my mental health. But yesterday it was World Suicide Prevention Day, and from my perspective, as somebody who's had multiple times in 2024 where I didn't want to exist anymore, and having sort of recovered from that a bit, fortunately with the help of the Signet staff who've been looking after me, I also kind of negotiated my way through quite a lot of delusional beliefs about institutional abuse that had been going on for decades. And it was really difficult going through the process of separating what you might think is a suspicion, and like a proportionate suspicion, and a belief. You can suspect something. You can look at shadows on a wall and say, well, there's a hand there, I can see the shadow, so there must be a hand there. But sometimes the brain can paint pictures that aren't as kind of lucid or real. But it made me think about all the people who have been victims of some of the atrocious acts that go on in British society, and the way that they might have felt the same way that I felt in 2024, and how that must impact people. And I guess as a society, one of the things that I'm aware of is that one of the things that gave me a relief is that I know that we don't have a Department of Health and Social Care, or a National Health Service, or a police service, or an intelligence service that would allow suppression of such massive scale abuse that I'd kind of cognitively sort of created within my own delusional narrative. And I guess that, oh, wait a second, let me just close my bed. I don't want to capture anybody else in this video. They're talking very loud outside, and I don't want to capture anybody who doesn't want to be in the video. So I know that there's things like the sex offenders register. People who are a danger to children or women or men because of their sexual deviancy are kind of put on this register and then are treated accordingly. I don't know how it works though. I don't know anything about it really. So I thought I'd try and find out a bit more about that, just to kind of align with my recovery and give me a bit more reassurance that there are systems in place that protect people, and there isn't this kind of like amorphous kind of octopus that just feeds off the populace, because that's what I thought for a long time, and it's been really challenging kind of coming around from that. And also in terms of the mental health, I mean, I one of the things that's quite clear for me is that the reason I was so fired up and righteously indignated about institutional abuse that I perceived was happening and been going on for since I was a teenager, is the way that must have, I thought, be making people feel. That must be something which, really deep down makes a huge difference to people's self-esteem, self-confidence, and self-worth, their ability to be able to, hold a conversation and, feel like they're not kind of dehumanized or devalued. So I wanted to look at the impacts of, people who have really been a victim of institutional abuse and sort of child sex trafficking and dehumanizing sexual humiliation, like I thought they might have been. Because I'm sure that, can lead people to feel the same way that I felt in 2024, and maybe help to raise a bit of awareness about the systems in place in this country that we've got to help mitigate that risk and keep people safe. And also wanted to kind of look at how effective the sex offenders register is. There's always this kind of ambiguous metric for crimes that we know nothing about. It's kind of how many people there are who we don't know are operating in society, and there always is going to be, policing figures can be, a low crime rate might be indicative of a poor police force, for example. There could be a high crime in an area but low arrest rate. Like in 2017 there were something like 2,000 reports in Nigeria, this was, of rape and sexual assault, and not a single conviction. I made an Instagram post about that the other day. But anyway, spent 6 minutes doing a preamble. Let's have a look at this prompt. And there's 2 documents I think it's given me to canvas today. So I'll read them both for you. Get this little widget out of the way. So for starters, what is the British Sex Offenders Register? How does it protect us all? How many people are on it, and how can British citizens use it to keep themselves safe? Also, how do criminals end up on the Sex Offenders Register? Would taking part in abduction and gang rape of women or young children, or acts of sexual humiliation, place somebody on the Sex Offenders Register? And what about sex trafficking offences? For example, would people who've made a living from orchestrating abduction of women or children to locations where they're dehumanised or raped still be treated in the same way as a hands-on sex offender? It was World Suicide Prevention Day yesterday, so I'd also like to know, what is the impact of long-term graphic sexual assault on adults and children? Can it cause suicidal iteration or other mental health problems, and what help is available to victims? In addition to this, although this is slightly ambiguous, there are estimated figures on the number of men and women who should be on the Sex Offenders Register but aren't. What's the estimated number of perpetrators of gang rape, institutional abuse, sexual humiliation and dehumanising treatment of women, children, or indeed men who go unabated and aren't reported, and so remain at large in the UK community? How can we mitigate risk as a cohesive society collectively? It says it's going to provide me a detailed breakdown of the British Sex Offenders Register, the profound impact of sexual assault and broader societal context of these crimes. Here are 2 documents that address your questions in detail. The first provides a comprehensive review of the Sex Offenders Register and related issues, and while the second offers a guide to understanding the impact of sexual assault and the support available. So this one, at 8:52 a.m. from the Lodge at Signet, I've got on September the 11th, this document, which I haven't read yet. So I'll put myself in a little widget in the top and get this floating screenshot thingy in the corner. So the British Sex Offenders Register, a tool for protection. The British Sex Offenders Register is not a public list that citizens can browse. Instead, it's a confidential database of individuals who've been cautioned, convicted or released from prison for a sexual offence. This register is a critical tool used by the police, probation services and other multi-agency public protection arrangements mapper to manage the risk potential posed by known sex offenders. How it protects us all. The register's primary function is to ensure that individuals who've committed sexual offences are monitored upon their return into the community. This is achieved through what are known as notification requirements, which legally oblige registered individuals to provide the police with personal information, including their name, any aliases news, their home address, details of any foreign travel, bank account and credit card details, and passport and national insurance information. Offenders must re-register annually or anytime their details change, allowing authorities to keep track of the whereabouts and assess any potential risks they may pose. Failure to comply with the requirements is a criminal offence punishable by up to 5 years in prison. So how many people are on this register then? As of the latest multi-agency public protection arrangement MAPA annual reports for 22-23, which is like 3 years ago, but anyway, there were 74,152 registered sex offenders in England and Wales. The number of registered sex offenders in Scotland and Northern Ireland are reported separately, but this figure gives a clear indication of the scale of monitoring undertaken. There's I guess there's about 70 million people in the UK, so it's kind of a very small percentage. While direct access to the register is not possible for the general public, there are specific schemes in place to protect children. The most notable of these is the Child Offender Disclosure Scheme, so commonly known as Sarah's Law. This scheme allows a parent, guardian or carer to ask the police if someone who has contact with their child has a record for child sexual offences. The police will then conduct checks and, if a risk is identified, will disclose information to the person best placed to protect the child. This is not an open access system, but a targeted safeguarding measure. How individuals end up on the register. Persons placed on the sex offenders register automatically following a caution or conviction for an offence listed in Schedule 3 of the Sexual Offences Act 2003. Specific offences leading to registration. The offences you've asked about would lead to an individual being placed on the register. So abduction and gang rape, quite obviously, if this sort of thing did happen in society, then they would be prosecuted under offences such as rape, which is primary qualifying offence for the registration. Sexual humiliation, acts of sexual humiliation would likely be prosecuted as sexual assault, another offence that triggers the registration requirements. Sex trafficking, this was one I wasn't sure about. So those who orchestrate the abduction and rape of women and children for financial gain are also subject to being placed on the register. The Modern Slavery Act 2015 works in conjunction with the Sexual Offences Act 2003. So trafficking for the purposes of sexual exploitation is a specified offence, meaning that those who organise and profit from such dehumanising crimes are treated as sex offenders in the eyes of the law and are subject to the same notification requirements as hands-on abusers. Hidden numbers, unreported offences and offenders at large. It's a sobering reality that a significant number of sexual offences are never reported to the police. This means there's a substantial gap between the number of people on the sex offenders register and the number of individuals in the community who have committed such crimes. Estimated figures of unreported offenders. According to the Crime Survey for England and Wales, it's estimated that fewer than 1 in 6 female victims of rape or assault by penetration report it to the police. It's shocking. Figures for male victims are similarly low. While it's impossible to give an exact number, these statistics suggest the number of men and women who have committed offences that would qualify them for the register but are not on it is vast. Perpetrators in the community. The low reporting rates for crimes like gang rape and institutional abuse mean that a significant number of perpetrators of these horrific acts remain at large in the UK. Community. The trauma, fear and shame experienced by victims often prevent them from coming forward, allowing offenders to evade justice. How can we mitigate risk as a society? Mitigating the risk from both known and unknown offenders requires a collective societal effort that goes beyond just monitoring. Key strategies include education, promoting comprehensive relationships and sex education, and schools that focuses on consent, respect and healthy relationships. Challenging harmful attitudes, actively challenging victim-blaming narratives and rape culture in all its forms. Supporting survivors, ensuring that well-funded, accessible and specialist support services are available for all victims to help them heal and feel empowered to report offences. Bystander intervention. This is, I think, is probably the most important one. Encouraging and teaching people how to safely intervene when they witness concerning or potentially harmful behaviour. Holding institutions to account is the final point. Ensuring that schools, sports clubs, religious institutions and other organisations have robust safeguarding policies and a culture that encourages speaking out against abuse. So the impact this document is about of sexual assault and the way that that might make people feel. So the devastating and long-term impact of sexual assault. Yesterday was World Suicide Prevention Day, and it's a painful reality that the trauma of sexual assault is a significant factor in suicidal ideation and mental health crisis for many survivors. The impact of long-term graphic sexual assault on both adults and children is profound, can be lifelong. Psychological and emotional scars. Survivors of sexual assault often experience a range of severe, debilitating mental health conditions, including PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. They can have flashbacks, nightmares, anxiety, uncontrollable thoughts about the assault, depression, so feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness, loss of interest in life are also common. Anxiety and panic attacks, a constant state of fear and hypervigilance can make everyday life extremely difficult, and indeed suicidal ideation and self-harm. The overwhelming pain and trauma of sexual assault can lead many survivors to consider or attempt suicide. The emotional agony can feel unbearable. Suicide can seem like the only way to escape the pain. The dissociation. Some survivors may feel detached from their bodies, their emotions, or reality itself as a coping mechanism. And of course, eating disorders are on there as well. The need to regain a sense of control can sometimes manifest in disordered eating patterns. Dehumanising nature of sexual humiliation and institutional abuse can shatter a person's sense of self-worth and their ability to trust others, leading to social isolation and a profound sense of loneliness. Help and support for victims and survivors. It's crucial for survivors to know that they're not alone and that help is available. The journey of healing is long and difficult. With the right support, it is possible. In the UK, a number of dedicated organisations offer expert help. First one is the NHS, not a sex trafficking organisation by any stretch of my deluded imagination. Your GP can be the first point of contact for accessing mental health services and referrals to specialist support. They've got special sexual assault referral centres that provide medical care and forensic examination if you choose to report to the police, as well as emotional support. Rape Crisis, with centres across the UK, Rape Crisis offers free confidential support and advocacy for women and girls who've experienced sexual violence. They provide counselling, support groups and practical help. The Survivors Trust, this is a national umbrella agency for over 120 specialist rape and sexual abuse support services for women, men and children. Their website can help you find your nearest support service. Victim Support, independent charity that provides emotional and practical help to people affected by crime, including sexual assault. Also, maybe a bit less catered for, but Male Survivors Partnership. This organisation provides support and resources specifically for male survivors of sexual abuse and rape. And the NSPCC for children and young people who've experienced sexual abuse. The NSPCC does have a helpline, a range of services to help them feel safe and begin to heal. And of course, the Samaritans, great organisation. Used to fundraise for them in my 20s, did very well at that. These organisations are staffed by trained professionals who understand the trauma of sexual assault, can provide a safe and non-judgmental space for survivors to work through their experiences. So I guess the long and the short answer about the ones that we don't know about, which might, if you're a bit like me and you have a slightly paranoid or worried sort of thought pattern where you think, well, what if there's loads of these people and they're everywhere and they've infected our public sector and they're operating, I don't know, like Roald Dahl's book The Witches, it mentions the NSPCC there, and he kind of quite candidly used an example in the book and in the film where there was this children's charity, but they meet in secret and actually they do the opposite. And I don't know, it's a work of fiction. Roald Dahl's books are about fantastical fantasy things that aren't really based or rooted anywhere in reality. And I don't think that the NSPCC is a front, that's not what I'm saying, just to be very clear about that. But I do think that what he was trying to express is probably quite a deeply ingrained problem, where even with the best sort of well-intentioned and funded support agencies in place, there probably is still a big problem, which, it's crimes we know nothing about, isn't it? You can't put that onto a pie chart or onto a graph, the how many successful murders take place. Well, we don't know. People, how many sexual assaults against children do people just get away with? They just kind of, still might be working in a primary school or a hospital, or in the Department of Health and Social Care, or as foster parents, or as care home assistants. These kind of places are all kind of places that we assume would be safe, and I do still assume. But yeah, sort of separating fact from reality is difficult, because you, as a person with, I did have schizoaffective disorder. My last ward down, they told me I've got a delusional disorder, and coming to terms with those delusions is like difficult, because it does still, from time to time, you do still have times where you feel suspicious, and there's a sort of confirmation bias where even if you don't believe something anymore, and you don't actively feel that something is sort of an accurate perception, you still have this confirmation bias where something small will kind of trigger it off, and you'll very quickly start to waver back into these thoughts of persecution, and could this be indicative of something? And it's the brain kind of gravitates back towards these things, and it it can be really challenging. But I hope that's been informative for you. I mean, I don't know much about the topic, and I think the least I can do is help try and raise a bit of awareness about the impact of these sort of crimes when they are happening, and it isn't just a figment of some delusional man's imagination. How it makes people feel, and with the caveat that I've been somebody who's felt really depressed to the point of taking it through to a logical conclusion, and the stigma that we don't have about talking about that. It's time, this time of year, it's time for everybody around the world to talk about mental health, and focus on the importance of talking to people about it and communicating in ways that lead people to the help that they need. But I hope that whoever's watching, if this is relevant to you, I hope that you get the help that you need to continue and enjoy your life, and just don't ever let anything define you, and most importantly, just don't give up.